So following on Amanda's excellent talk, I can share with you a little bit about what we're doing at the University of Hong Kong to help address the forensics side, the enforcement side of this complex problem. And as she rightly highlighted, wildlife trade is one of the most lucrative black market criminal activities on the planet. And if you sum up this statistic here with illegal fishing and illegal logging, it definitely becomes one of the most serious sources of criminal activity on the planet. So that's indisputable. And many of us in the room, we know a lot about some of the high-profile organisms that are targeted by this illegal trade. We often think of elephant ivory, which can attract 42,000 US dollars per tusk, or rhino horn, which can approach almost 100,000 US dollars per horn. And at these prices, these commodities are more valuable on a per weight basis than most narcotics and some precious metals. So you can easily see why there is an attraction to exploiting these species. The other issue is that many of these species don't reproduce very quickly, and their populations are not sustainably harvested in any way. So for that reason, you have rare species that equates to a limited supply, plus an unlimited global demand, and you have prices that are running away. The profit margins are therefore huge, and therefore, from a criminal mind perspective, the reward greatly exceeds the risk. And that is further exacerbated by the fact that many of these criminal syndicates take advantage of impoverished people who, because of their impoverished status, will be the one to fire the bullet to take the animal. And they'll be the one to traffic those products overseas because they're desperate for that income. And often the people who are behind those syndicates are not putting themselves in any personal risk whatsoever, and they're very difficult to track down. So this is why we need forensics. We need scientific data and evidence to contribute to these prosecutions and get to the source of the issue. Amanda already expertly pointed out that we are a hub for the illegal wildlife trade, exploiting populations of species throughout Southeast Asia and Africa. This is primarily due to Hong Kong's status as a free port. So it just so happens that it's convenient and it's cost-effective to bring these products through Hong Kong on their way to China and other markets. So because Hong Kong has such a powerful and well-established global trade presence, it's natural for illegal commodities to be entrained in that supply chain. Now, we are all familiar with the headlines that we see, and as Amanda also pointed out, we're talking about tons. We measure the volume of traded species and their products by the ton. And it almost seems that on a monthly or weekly basis, we're getting headlines like these in the popular press. The values are astonishing. The mass of material is shocking. And what we have to remind ourselves is that for each pair of tusks, we're talking about one animal that's been removed from the wild. For each consignment of these pangolin scales, we're talking about thousands of individuals. And when you start to understand the biology of these species and how much of a range that they actually occupy, you start to appreciate that we are really wiping them out at a very astonishing speed. Now, why is this an issue? It's because a lot of these products are very easy to launder. A recent example from elephant ivory is that instead of shipping the raw tusks, which are easily identified with an X-ray machine, these traffickers are now carving the tusks into mahjong tiles. So the mahjong tiles go undetected through customs. So they're clever ways of hiding and concealing these products that allow their trade to continue. We also have a diversity of wildlife that's really hard to grasp, even from a biologist's perspective. This is a dried seafood shop that we're familiar with just down the street from us, which has many hundreds of species whose identity is largely unknown, whose origin is largely unknown. So we don't even have a good understanding of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. And those are just the species that we're importing. we also have species locally that have conservation value, that are under threat from human exploitation. These are yellow-crested cockatoos, which you can see flying around our campus. They're an invasive species here in Hong Kong, but they actually represent the second largest population of these birds on the planet. And so therefore, they have a very high conservation value for protecting them. But even these birds are not safe here, as it's been documented that people are poaching chicks from the nests of the parents to put into the pet trade. And likewise, we have poachers that are coming into Hong Kong and they are chopping down agarwood or the incense trees, which give Hong Kong its namesake of fragrant harbor. So we are the last home for these trees in their natural environment, and people are slowly hacking them to bits and taking them back into the mainland. So the list goes on, and for this reason, my colleagues and I in the School of Biological Sciences, as well as the Department of Earth Science, have decided that to work together to address these problems, and it builds on a legacy of conservation biology that's existed at Hong Kong U for many decades. But we've decided to combine these terms, so conservation biology with the scientific investigation of crime, and that's where we come up with this term, conservation forensics. And we use a lot of scientific tools, from DNA tests to geochemical tests, and also looking at data and analytics to try to build evidence and intelligence for fighting against this serious problem. And our perspective is that we really want to be a resource that the government can rely upon to augment their enforcement efforts. So we have a lot of expertise in different species, and so I'm going to talk you through a few examples of what we do right now. So first, a project that I was involved in dealt with a curious case of these tiny little fish that were being smuggled through the Hong Kong airport live by the thousands. And this was a new issue that emerged a few years ago, and government officials and customs were baffled as to what these were. And so we conducted a DNA test to confirm that these were eels that were coming from Europe, the European eel, which is a critically endangered species. And so this happened to be a pretty serious piece of evidence to confirm the illegal transit of European eels, which are critically endangered and prohibited from export from the European Union. And we were the first to verify that this trade route existed. Those data, with government's permission, we shared them with Spain and Europol, which were conducting a Europe-wide investigation on this illegal trade, and it led to 40 arrests and the breakup of this criminal syndicate just from sending them some DNA sequences. But then we had the question, where is this going? Where are the eels going? Well, they're going into China, and they're being grown into large adults, and they have about a 3,000% profit margin. And then what's happening is that they're being relabeled as just eel, so the identity of where they come from is totally lost, and they're being resold back to us. So we did a survey of 7-Eleven and Welcome and all the grocery stores and convenience stores in Hong Kong, and we found that 50% or so of the eel products were actually European eels. So we're all eating endangered species, and we don't know about it, and I think that's pretty shocking. We are also working on other organisms that are of an emergent issue. So these are helmeted hornbills, with the mainland cracking down on ivory trade. There's a substitution effect that happens. So if I can no longer purchase ivory, I still have the desire for a product that is attractive to my eyes. And so these poor hornbills are now the next victim. There's virtually nothing known about the biology of these birds, which populations are being impacted. So we have a team that's working in their native range to try to identify which populations are being affected and learning a little bit about their genetics as well, so we can develop new forensic tools. Another example has to do with the live fish trade, which Amanda mentioned is a very lucrative trade, and Hong Kong is the global epicenter for it, exploiting the reef fish from most of Southeast Asia for our live seafood restaurants. And because of the lax enforcement on live fish imports, there's really no intelligence as to what's happening in our wet markets, what's being sold there, because the volume is just so huge, 22,000 tons, she mentioned earlier. And if you approach a vendor, well, most of them are unlikely to cooperate with an investigation. So we decided to develop a tool that uses a passive approach. So we simply walk around wet markets and we slurp up the water that's on the floor. And the water that's on the floor is coming out of the aquariums and the tanks, and it's being spilled out of buckets when people are transporting fish around. And that water contains remnants of the DNA of all the fish that are being sold. And when you slurp up that water and we do DNA sequencing on it, we can create an entire species list of all the fish that are being sold in the market on that day. And the method works quite well, and we're now talking with government about how they can use it as an intelligence gathering mechanism. We also have a group that's working on differentiating between captive bred and wild-caught animals, because it's fine for someone to say, oh, I'm farming these turtles, so it's sustainable. But in fact, in many cases, they're still taking those animals from the wild. They're lying, and they're mislabeling their products, and we can catch them. For example, with these yellow-crested cockatoos, we can measure the chemistry of their feathers, and we can tell whether or not they're being fed a wild diet, a natural diet, or if they're being given something from a human, a pet food, for example. We can tell very clearly. And similarly, with live fish trade, we have a group that's working on image recognition and fingerprinting. So we can identify individuals based on their facial marking using machine learning algorithms and advanced artificial intelligence. So we can even crowdsource these data from people who are passionate about conservation. You can snap a photo of this Some, or the Napoleon wrasse. You can snap a photo and upload it to a cloud, and we can confirm whether or not this individual was imported legally into Hong Kong. And likewise, the last example is that we are using the same sorts of technologies, image recognition, to take photographs of shark fins, because shark fins have a unique pattern on their skin that is related to the species of shark. Now, there are hundreds of species of sharks out there, so imagine if you're a customs official and your job is to screen tons and tons of shark fins that are coming through the border every day, and your job is to identify whether or not those bags of shark fins have any of the 12 species that are presently protected by international treaty. It's nearly an impossible task. Our job is to develop technology so that you can scan the shark fins and you can identify the problematic ones immediately, and then proceed to doing genetic testing to confirm that they are indeed illegal. So with that, I'd like to thank our sponsors and our partners, and I'll pass the microphone. Thank you very much.